All right, as the robot lady said, recording in progress. Welcome, everyone. This is Jack Mangan from Support Life and Music. You may also know me from from other shows such as the Metal Hall of Fame. I'm a board member there. I've been a journalist with metalasylum.net and a frequent collaborator at the Metal Voice. But I'm not all metal. You see, I'm wearing a Beatles shirt today. So I'm not all metal all the time. But yeah, I'm floored to have two amazing people who've done so much for the podcast world, so much for the music world, so much for the independent music world, so much. I could just talk until we run out of time about the accomplishments of these two. So I just want to say thank you both for joining me. First, I'll say to my former Arizona pal, Dani Cutler, thank you so much. The scene mom, Dani Cutler, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, of course. No, I'm thrilled to have you, and I'm thrilled to introduce Dani. Two people who are again, I see them both as giants in this world who've actually never been on a show together. So I'm thrilled. George Hrab, an absolute legend of the independent music scene and the East Coast, has done so many incredible songs and collaborations, and just someone I respect just beyond the pale. So George Hrab, thank you so much for talking to us today.
My goodness, Jack, that's so sweet. Thank you. Nice to be here. And hi, Dani. Good to see you. And
Yeah, you too.
let's chat about something interesting
I
and
figure we can, if he
independent.
just keeps showering us with compliments,
Seriously,
I mean,
right?
I
I'm
could
just
just
gonna
sit
like lay
back.
back
It's
and
fine.
like this
No,
ego
no,
massage. This is perfect. I'm just like, oh, you're right there, right there.
now you're cut off. No more.
Is that it?
No,
Okay,
no more.
good.
That's it. No more.
Wait,
Jeez.
am I muted? Wait.
That's right.
I'm not going to say anything further nice about either one of you. That's it. Cut off.
Good.
Well, something again, as I said, you guys of the many. I see. I'm going to break my promise right now. Of the many awesome things you guys have done for the podcasting in the world, independent music, I think, is a very important thing, especially as the landscape changes in the music world. So, I'm going to start with a question for both of y'all, since I'm in Arizona. How do you? Let's just do an easy one. How do you define indie musician? And I'll put a part two on that. What would change, especially George? What would change so where you would no longer call yourself an indie musician? So we'll start there.
Wow.
Ooh,
I mean,
that was easy.
go for it, Dani. Go for it.
I would say, see, and it's already a clouded answer because you could say an independent musician is someone who's not on a label, but labels have changed so much over the years that major labels have indie labels. So it's really hard to define what an independent musician is. I mean, you could say DIY, they do it all themselves. They record their music, they put it out on their own, they handle all the marketing. But yeah, I mean, I'm already getting like wrapped up in my answer because it could go so many directions. To not be an indie musician, that might be a little easier, maybe, to answer because I feel like there would be a threshold and it might be a monetary thing, perhaps. I mean, you get on a larger label, you start bringing in more money, you get on tours, you're suddenly touring, and then boom, you're Bastille or Taylor Swift or Metallica or something. I don't know. And I'm being very general because as loaded, I mean, as simple of a question as you made it seem, it could go in so many directions. So I'm really glad I answered that very concisely. Your turn, George.
No, yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with a sort of an idea of a centralized money organization. And that's again, we're talking shades of gray on some level because
Mm-hmm.
any independent musician, any independent venture is going to have a smaller and smaller centralized money source, usually not coming from the artists themselves. I mean, to me, the ultimate independent artist would be someone that is self-funded. That to me would be the sort of the defining independent, whether it's a filmmaker or a musician or a painter or a sculptor or whatever. A real independent, pure, genuine independent person would be fully self-funded. Now that practically doesn't really exist because even that individual would be selling tickets, would be selling product, would be getting funds from some external source because we don't just magically generate money on ourselves. And if someone could do that, or someone did come from some kind of background where they did have disposable income, that to me would be sort of less of an independent because it would still be coming from a centralized money source. you know.
Yeah.
But again, it's a transient line of like, from, yes, some record labels have independent labels within themselves, but it's not going to be nearly as independent as, you know, like Black Flag was in the mid late 70s or something like that. That fully was just, we have like no budget, no essential centralized money to do, and we're just going to do what we can by sleeping on couches and doing whatever guerrilla style recording we can. So yeah, so it's a very fuzzy kind of question. What it would take for me to no longer be an independent musician is, it would be the aesthetic of the independent musician, the ethos of the independent musician that is, can determine their own fate and their own product, their own music, their own thing that they're doing. Maybe that's a better definition of it. That the independent artist is more in charge of the product that they're making, because
like
again, they're not sort of beholden to a centralized money person or an organization. Um, I would be hard pressed to take any kind of deal that would dictate what I have to make, unless I understood that ahead of time and was like, oh, you want a soundtrack for a horror movie? It needs to fulfill these tropes. Okay, sure. That wouldn't be like a George Hrab and, you know, album. It would be like a George Hrab movie score, or a, you know, or someone wants a commercial, let's say, for Snickers. I would happily do that, but that wouldn't be part of my musical sort of world. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's kind of a one-off is what it sounds like. It's like you can do these
on
one-off,
some level,
like like
yeah.
Trent Reznor does all these movie soundtracks,
Sure.
but it doesn't sound anything like Nine Inch Nails.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And yet is still part of the Trent ethos. You know,
Yeah.
Trevor Rabin, one of my favorite guitarists, does movie scores. You know, and it's like he did 15 movie soundtracks, and none of it sounds like Yes from the 80s, or very little of it does. But yes, similar thing, but that's sort of within that. But that's, again, that would be understood. But to Jack's question as to what would, if someone came and said, you know, we want you to make a solo album, but here's the constraints. I would be, I mean, it would take a lot of money to do that.
You're right. And, you know, you're both right, because it was a little bit of a rough question, because, right, it's sort of pigeonholing something. So I would say an artist, I knew of an artist, I don't want to name names, but they did sign to a label, and they went to Nashville to make the record, and the label, now they were a old time rock artist, and the label's like, okay, your country album is going to come out, it's going to be great. And they went, what? You know, so but that person, I would still not say, maybe that's not an independent release, that country album that they made. And again, this is not disparaging country, by the way, you know, but that wasn't what the person set out to do. And the record label basically said, here's welcome to the studio to record your new album. Here's a banjo player. Okay. So I guess I'm rolling with this, but I would still say, I would not take away, if that person wanted to declare themselves an indie artist, I wouldn't, I mean, I would never want to be a gatekeeper in any way, but I would not want to take that away from them. So I appreciate you guys bringing insight to my question, and that was, yeah, great answers to the question. And
are they getting harder from here, Jack? Are the questions getting more difficult?
Yeah. Well, wait till we get to the math. That's going to be the really difficult one.
Oh, great!
Yeah.
No,
Final Jeopardy is going to be real nasty.
Well. You know, so I guess, I mean, you know, one of Support Life in Music, what we really are trying to do is just try, you know, there's a lot of pitfalls and dangers in the music world. And, you know, it's one of our mission statements, is to really help protect musicians, you know, from falling into these kinds of things. So I don't, is there, I guess I'll start with, I'll reframe the question as it's written over here. Is there a particular set of dangers or hazards or pitfalls that are more likely to affect independent musicians than sponsored musicians? Or is it basically the same, the road is the road, and the dangers are the same in life?
You know, there is the unfortunate thing that people that usually are involved in artistic endeavors have no money sense, or are not starting with any kind of money. So any hint of money or semblance of potentiality for money usually is grabbed at very quickly. What I think the current young artists are very savvy in terms of rights, copyright, you know, streaming rights, YouTube rights, all that kind of stuff, and are very wary to not sign stuff away. Whereas when you look at every genre that comes along, especially any kind of like fast, impactful genre like reggae or punk or new wave or doo-wop or even rock and roll in its earliest forms, at every juncture, all the artists that are on the front edge of those new genre defining movements get totally screwed by the money people. It's like again and again, and it just happens again. Hip hop, and sort of at every point, because it's a person who gets a certain amount of funds flashed in their face, and they can think like, oh, this is great because I have nothing. And when you have nothing, anything is fantastic. Not realizing the potentiality of like how much is actually on the table in the long run. So I think I think because these stories have been told a lot and been disseminated through the culture, all of the VH1 behind the music specials and all of the books and all of the biographies and all of the, documentaries about artist after artist after artist getting screwed, getting sort of played with and played over. I think there's a much more savvy approach now of understanding, like, you got to own your own stuff. You have to own your own copyright. Don't don't sign away things. In the short term, it might be more difficult, but in the long term, like, that you can establish some kind of audience and that you get all the whatever revenue there may be, you will get the vast majority of it because you own those rights. So yeah, I just love that at every point people have gotten screwed just again and again and again until sort of like the last maybe 10 years or so.
Yeah.
Are we still talking about music? Sorry, are we still talking about music?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's like, it's the whole culture. Yeah.
It really does cross over. But funny that you mentioned that, George, because I just finished reading about, I just read Debbie Harry's autobiography, Face
Cool.
It. And
yeah,
it was very interesting. She wrote it about 5 years ago or whatever, but I finally got around to reading it because you know how it is. You have a million books on the shelf and and you buy them all, but you never read them. But anyway, I found it very fascinating because she goes through how, they got started, and we're talking, it's the 60s and 70s, and getting with a label, getting screwed by that label and managers and everything. And, we get in our mind with these famous celebrities and musicians that, oh, they're famous, so everything must be just hunky dory. They're just making bank. They're just living grand life. But all the times that she was homeless right. and looking for places, and this is even, there were some drug issues, but those aside, taxes, millions in taxes. And she was very upfront about all that. And it really brought home that no matter how famous an artist is, there's struggles, there's debt, there's money, there's, like you said, there's bad contracts, there's bad management, there's, and it doesn't matter. And honestly, I think a lot of reasons that older artists continue to tour and do book tours is because they're trying to pay off their debt.
I mean, there are entire bands whose entire catalog has technically made no money.
Right.
There's entire bands that just had hits on the radio, but because of the way the structure of those contracts, that they were fronted so much money for videos, for travel, for production, for costumes, for donuts, for whatever. They're in the hole then, and they're just paying back.
Green M&Ms.
Right, and you can look at, I mean, Till Tuesday is a great example. Amy Mann's band, Till Tuesday has made like negative $2 million to this day. It's some crazy figure like that, where she talks about this, how, like, we had a top 10 hit, international top 10 hit, but technically that band never made a penny because of the way the structure of the other thing was. So it's like,
yeah. And I think a lot of artists today that are starting, so, if you're starting up as an artist, you're independent, I think they get doe-eyed and just like, ooh, about they look at these artists and they look at even going later, into the 2000s or whatever, and they see these artists and they're doing well and they're doing these world tours and they want that because they think that's the definition of making it in success, but they don't realize what a struggle it is no matter how famous you are. And I think that's, they end up shooting themselves in the foot, so to speak, because they get wrapped up in that. And being an artist, being a musician is as much of a business as it is art.
I think there's very few examples that we see in the popular culture of musicians that make a living that aren't superstars. And there are hundreds of thousands of people that you can,
Yes.
you can live, you can have an okay life. It's not yachts and champagne.
Right.
But it's, you make as much as I was going to say plumber, but I could only dream to make as much as a plumber.
I know. I wish I made as much as
you know what I mean? Yeah, it's like, or a dentist or something. But
but I see your point.
Some kind of
Sure.
teacher, craftsman. You can make a living, doing the thing, and I think that is very rarely shown in the culture as being successful. Whereas to me, it's like that's incredibly successful. If you get to,
I would love that,
right? You do the creative stuff that you want, and you're making, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 like a year. I mean, that to me that's great, but that's you never see that sort of shown as here's a thing you can do, or here's a way to make a living. Yeah, that's not the glamorous sort of MTV Cribs cliche, which anything that's not that is seen as failure. Is seen as some kind of like, oh well, you're only you only have an audience of 1,000 people. It's like, well, yeah, but those 1,000 people I know those 1,000 people will spend $100 a year on me. Like, do the math. You know what I mean? Like those whatever 500 fans, those 2,000 fans, I know will spend $20 two times a year on me. I mean, that's not bad, So kind of if you I hope that through things like this, we can reshape the expectations to understand, like, you don't need to be Taylor Swift to be seen as successful.
Right.
And she's amazing, and it's great, and it's like, boy, but the organizational thing behind her that got her to where she is it's a lottery ticket. It's a very rare kind of thing.
Exactly.
What's not a lottery ticket is culminating a fan base that can be a couple hundred people, a couple thousand people, that then get incredibly loyal because they feel like, not that they own you, but that it's like this club, like, it's this secret thing, and that they are, my fans are unbelievably loyal. And, I know that if I put something out or, make something available, that a certain percentage of people are going to get it. And then it just feeds itself,
Yeah. Another thing before I just more thoughts keep coming into my brain, but to allude to the question about struggles, another thing that came to my mind was, regardless of your celebrity stature or what you're making, things like healthcare and being able to, to help yourself, even, not even just, mental health, of course, but, healthcare in general. I'm thinking of the Grammys when Chappell Roan made her speech, which was an amazing speech about the lack of healthcare for artists and taking care of artists. And I think that's something that, regardless of whether you're independent or mainstream, could be a problem as well.
Yeah. No, excellent point, Dani. And I mean, there's like 400 excellent points between both of you just in the last 5 minutes. But yeah, that is a wonderful, and you're right, that can contribute to a spiral. If there's someone who's kind of in a self-destruction spiral, you're right. Just oh my goodness, I injured my hand. I can't afford to, or it'll cost me $10,000 to go get an X-ray, or 20,000, or whatever it costs. So I think that's an excellent point. There's so many things in that life, and I really like what George said. About it being a middle-class lifestyle being seen as a failure if you're in the arts, if you're an author or a musician. But I've just this past week, I'm gonna name drop now because I'm so cool. But I interviewed one of the cellists in Apocalyptica, and he basically, he lives in Finland. He's a very cool guy, Paavo Lochanen, He said exactly what you said. He said, I don't have yachts and all this stuff. He said, I live a middle class life with my family, and I couldn't be happier. And but yeah, I'll say one more story, and then I'll shut up and let my brilliant guests talk more. But I recall the band Grizzly Bear, great indie band from the early 2000s. I don't know if you guys remember them, but they were
Oh, I
poised.
don't.
I highly recommend them. They're just fantastic. They were kind of poised to take over the world. It was the early 2000s though. They just had awful timing. If they'd come out 20 years earlier, they would all be living in yachts. But it was just to give you a clue to their level of success or they were the rising star. They were Pitchfork. All the indies were talking about them. Jay-Z went to go see them, and when the interviewer said, "Why are you at this show, Jay-Z?" He said, "I got to see what's going on. This is the next big thing in the music." And I said, "I want to know what's going on." These were four guys who were living in a one-bedroom apartment in New York with no money and they were quote at the time the biggest name in the world. And they changed, like, every independent band, non-metal band I went to see sounded like Grizzly Bear for a couple of years. Like, they just were set to rule the world, but there was not a whole lot of money. Now, if you're in the Grizzly Bear camp, or you can correct if I'm spouting misinformation, then call me on it. But this goes back to what George is saying. I think it was just because the vacuum had gotten so predatory and parasitic at that point that I think they were still trying to do it the old way that made the Alice Coopers and people into millionaires, and there was no money left for the artists. The money went everywhere else.
Yeah.
So and that's one of the things I wanted to ask. And you said something a little bit earlier. What can all of us, but especially me, I'm running S.L.A.M. I'm part of S.L.A.M. What can S.L.A.M. do as an organization to help save, to help people struggling in this world, and also not just me and S.L.A.M. What can everyone do? So I'll ask either one of you to take that question.
I think the biggest way you can support is be a resource. I mean, there's information at our fingertips. There's so many ways to find out, but a lot of artists, I think, feel lost because they do get in their own little bubbles and they don't realize what's available to them. So having something like S.L.A.M. to be that kind of a resource, and just have places where, like a hub where people can go and find out, anything from where can I go for healthcare? Where can I go for to talk to somebody? Where can I go to record? Because a lot of these indie artists, they can't afford to, go to some major studio, but there's a lot of indie studios out there that are fantastic. How do I promote my music? How do I do this? So, going back to what George was saying about, middle class, just making a living at your music, having that kind of resource is another way to show these artists that they have the support they need and they're not alone in this, and it can be done. And you should be proud of a career that you want to make in music without needing to get, the world tour and, hookers and blow or whatever, So there's my thought on it. It's all about support. I do everything I can to support the indie artists beyond playing music. The new show I'm doing is about, not just showing or supporting the artists by playing their music. It's about, letting them know what's going on in the industry and helping them find ways to promote. And, they need that support.
I think the practicalities of creating music, and sometimes it's better to know what not to do and even to do, or what products don't make sense, or what kind of things are a waste of time, like paying for a battle of the bands or something like that. Like it's like you get really shaky, weird places where, like, you have to pay to play. Like, you should never pay to play. Like, even though it can be very tempting sometimes to think, oh, it's just $100 and we get to be one of 10 bands at this thing. And it's like, oh, to sort of let people know that kind of stuff. Or yeah, if I mean, a lot of libraries, my library here in Bethlehem, which I love, I'm in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and our library, the Bethlehem Public Library, has a recording studio. They have a recording studio that they give you an engineer, and you can do a podcast, you can do songs, you just sign it out like a book, and you can use it. And it's like such an amazing resource to someone that wants to just get a couple ideas down, or even wants to get them and their couple friends to record something very garagey. But I'm sure there's dozens, if not hundreds, of examples like that across the country, of places that are like you said, Danny, just sort of like for recording, or for guitar repair, or for drum lessons, or arranging, or whatever it may be. And to have a hub where that can that information can at least be directed towards, like, oh, like, here's a question, who's got an answer for this question, or like, should I use this $15,000 microphone? Like, no, you don't need the $15,000 microphone. The $70 microphone is fine. Believe me, you don't need the $200 microphone. That those kind of, like, the stuff I sometimes wish someone had said to me, of just like, yeah, no, you don't need that. You don't use this thing instead, or borrow this, or whatever. Those kinds of resource ideas, I think, are really good.
I love it. Well, so I'm going to do this thing's a little bit out of order here. I could talk again to these two people all day, but I want to make sure I'll get you guys out of here with a few more questions. But before we get there, I want to make sure we do not leave without you guys having a chance to talk about the things you guys have going on. I know you've both done many exciting things ever since I've known you, but please tell me, let people who are maybe watching, who maybe are less familiar with you, tell them about anything you have coming up for 2025, or any recent things, anything you want to promote. This is the time. You
go ahead, George.
I've been doing my podcast for 18 years, which I can't quite fathom. I was working on episode 906 before we came online here. That's at geologicpodcast.com. That's just sort of a rambly collection of stories and music things and whatever. I have this really fun concert this weekend, actually. I've recognized that people love to sort of get the inside scoop on how music works, especially people that are non-musical. And there are YouTubers that are phenomenally good at this, of like pulling a song apart and saying, oh, here's the sample, here's the recording, here's the bass part, here's like what they did. They doubled this with bells and blah, 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 blah. And people, this goes back to when I used to do jazz lectures years and years ago. I was in a jazz quartet, and we would go to a bookstore and do a jazz concert / lecture. And I would describe what's happening. Like, hey, this is what's happening when you're hearing a jazz song. And people that have been listening to jazz their whole lives would be like, that's what's happening? Like, that's for improvising? It's like the changes. And so I've kind of taken it upon to expand that. I started doing during COVID, I started doing this 7 songs series on YouTube, where I would take 7 songs that had a shared theme, like every title has a color in it, or these are cool bridges, or these are all Elton John non-singles, whatever it may be, and just talk about, this is what he's doing when he's playing, and this is what's going on. This weekend I have a show that I'm doing that for my own music, because a friend of mine said, like, you should do that for your own stuff. I'm like, I should do that for my own stuff. So I got a great band together. We're doing 10 songs. I'm going to talk about what went into the writing of it and that kind of thing. And it's another example of sort of finding this market that people seem to be really interested in. And especially, I love the challenge of explaining a musical concept to a non-musical person. Where you can't say, oh, I just have a modulation here that, goes to the 5/5, and then we go to the dominant chord. Like, you can't do that. So you have to say, okay, picture a sidewalk with bricks on it, and the bricks are all different sizes, and you have to, to do whatever kind of metaphor you can. And when it clicks, and they go, oh, that's what's happening there. Oh, that's why that sounds really cool. I just adore that. So I've been doing that kind of stuff. I have albums that are out and all kinds of other things, but yeah.
Amazing. Well, I hope that's recorded, by the way. And I'll say one more plug for me. I hope that's going to be recorded. I should say one more plug for George, and then I definitely want to hear Danny's answer the same question. But I loved the thing George did for one of these 4 guys. It was something about in defense of Ringo Starr. The dumb guy who can't play drums. No. George completely takes that apart, and I'm team Ringo, by the way.
Ringo. I was at a Skeptic conference, and it was at a Nexus in New York, which is this Northeast Conference for Science and Skepticism, and it was at the after thing. You're at the bar after all the talks and stuff, and off the corner of my ear, I hear someone talking about the Beatles and slagging Ringo, and I was just like, skeptics, right? They're like critical thinkers, like going, "Oh, he's just," blah, blah, blah. And I thought, damn it, all right, I'm going to make a video that talks about the genius of Ringo, because again, it's like, and it was a perfect example of when you don't know a topic, that kind of Dunning-Kruger thing, like the less you know, the more you think you know. It's like, oh, he just played drums. It's like, okay, here's why you're wrong, and here's why Ringo is awesome. And I tell you, I got such a wonderful response from that. I mean, the guy that plays drums in Ringo's band, Greg Bissonette, he got in touch. The guy from Styx, who's a huge Ringo fan, the drummer from Styx, got in touch with me. He was just like, "Thank you for doing this." It was really, really cool. So yeah, it was a ton of work. Oh my God. It was one of these examples of like the indie craziness of just like, oh God, I don't have the right equipment to do this. I don't even know how to do this. And there's comments, of course, like, "You need better mics." I'm like, yeah, of course I need better mics. Are you going to buy me a better mic? Like, we're in COVID. This is what I got to work with. I'm going to make this. And this, that exists is better than anything I would have made waiting to purchase the better camera or the better mic or the better editing thing, So yeah, thanks for saying that, Jack. That was one of the cooler things I did.
I'm gonna have to. Is that somewhere where I can see it?
It's on the YouTube. You just
okay. I gotta go check that out because that's amazing.
Ringo Hrab, it'll come up. It's like a 14-15
minute
thing.
Nice. So you alluded to pulling apart your music and everything. So I have a classical music background. I play viola, and so yeah, and I still geek out over patterns and putting music together and putting it apart and the different parts and everything. When I did my first recording of for a local indie band, Scattered Melodies, they needed strings, so they asked me to play. I was terrified because the first thing I said was, "Do you have sheet music?" And he was like, "No, but I'll send you the recording." And at first I freaked out a bit, but I took on the challenge and I listened to it and I pulled it off. But it was a great experience. And I digress because I'm getting off the topic. But I played viola, and I've always had a very strong interest, of course, in music. And, growing up in the 80s, Jack, who's my favorite band?
Duran something, Quiet Riot, Duran Duran.
Quiet Duran Riot. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I am not, I'm not shy about my love for them. But anyway,
Duran's the best, and they're still phenomenal.
Yeah.
Simon still sings like a mother. It's so.
I just saw them at the beginning of November in Manchester, New Hampshire, and yes, right. But anyway.
Anyway, okay, we'll talk more offline.
That's not what I do, everybody. It's like I don't just follow Duran Duran around like a Grateful Dead person. But if I had the money, I would. That's right. So when I lived in Phoenix, I worked in independent radio for about 16 years, KWSS. And what started as middays and a lunch hour retro hour called Danny's Diner turned into the morning show. And then I took over a lot of the operations of the station. So when you want to talk about independent radio, I mean, that's where it's at. We supported so many artists and would have them in, just like what you see behind me now. My studio was like this in Phoenix, and I had the artists come in the home studio to interview them, and just so passionate about supporting the scene because I know the struggle. It's independent to me is like running a small business. It really is DIY, and I have my own marketing promotion business. So I definitely know, and together we rise. So however it can support that. So independent radio, which I actually got into because further back than that, as I know Jack knows, I started in podcasting before radio. So I kind of flipped the script there. Usually you go to podcast from radio. Well, no, it was I had a political podcast called Truth Seekers that I started. And from there I got into radio. They didn't want my talk show but they said, you have a great voice. Why don't you, do some voice tracking? And I was like, sure. That's literally how I started in radio, which is total independent, right? So I did that for 16 years, supporting the industry. My business kind of pivoted to help more independent artists with promoting and marketing, and not just through the radio station, but also myself. That's how I met Kathy Rankin, because she and her sister had her little duo Wicked Kiss, and they wanted to promote their single that came out in their video. So they they asked me to help them. So that's how I met her and work with them, and friends for life now. About a year and a half ago, we moved to Massachusetts, north central Massachusetts, about a couple hours from Boston. And so I've been working on getting my business up and running here, and have been meeting a lot of the indie community here as well. And since I'm not in radio currently, I started a new podcast. I was given the moniker Scene Mom in Phoenix from the indie scene there, which I embraced lovingly. And so I started a podcast called Scene Mom Says, and it covers 5 or 6 independent artists, their music. And I talk some music industry news, marketing promo tips, little music history. And I put that out once a week right now. So that's kind of where I'm at.
It's funny you mentioned viola, and of course, the joke. What's the difference between a violin and a viola? A viola burns longer. Yeah.
Yep. Oh, I've heard them all.
You've heard them all. Yeah, that's right.
I've rolled my eyes to them all.
Difference between a viola and a trampoline. You take off your shoes when you jump on a trampoline. Yeah. But it's interesting that
Stop.
I have a whole list of a viola's driving a car and a frog driving a car. The frog might be on the way to a gig.
Jack, you can hit mute anytime now. Mute.
sorry. Oh yeah, I'll do drummer jokes next. Believe me, I got plenty. Okay, my favorite drummer joke of all time, which is, how do you know when a drummer's riser is level? The drool comes out of both corners of the mouth. That's my favorite. So, yeah, it's fantastic. But you mentioned like playing, someone saying, are you asking, is there music? Do you have a chart? And there's this one thing that independent people can do, independent musicians can do, and independent artists can do, which is teach yourself to be able to communicate to other artists in the most efficient way possible. Like, the best compliment I get from band members that work with me is like, oh my God, you have a chart. Like, oh my, like we love playing with you because you give us charts, because very often sort of the bar is very, very low in terms of when you want to work with someone. It's like, oh yeah, we'll give you a recording, or it kind of goes like this, which can be very fun, and you can get a lot of sort of back and forth, but it doesn't cost you anything apart from time to learn how to write a cogent chart. You can go on YouTube, you can learn how to write musical notation, not even like notes, but just like, these are the chords, this is the structure, you repeat this, you do this, you back, to be able to learn that and to be able to communicate that in a way will open up an entire world of other artists that will want to work with you. Like, that's the beautiful thing of so often within sort of a popular musical context, there is a cluelessness in terms of understanding how to communicate with others that maybe are really good at what they do, like a violist or a saxophone player, or someone that might be schooled in a more direct or more purposeful way than someone who just learned guitar on their own or bass on their own.
Right.
It doesn't cost you anything, like I said, apart from time, to learn how to communicate with other artists. And then all of a sudden you get this explosion of cross-pollinated projects that can be so much fun and interesting. And then artists want to work with you, and you get the reputation as like, oh yeah, this is a person who treats their fellow co-musicians or co-workers with respect and understand their time's valuable. You want to make, so like when I go to my bass player and I said, here's the bass part, here's a recording, and here's a chart, and here's the written out bass sections. And he's just like, this is great, because I can come in and just rely on my skill as a bass player, because I've been playing for 30 years, and read the chart, and we can efficiently get everything done in as little amount of time as possible, which makes it, again, because there's no money for rehearsal space, so you have to, so it's this like pyramid that kind of gets built up. So that's something I would love to communicate to people that are just starting out, that like to learn how to communicate to other artists in an efficient way. It's
Yeah.
just it's so valuable.
And you don't need the entire song with sheet music. I
Right,
mean, it's not Mozart, right?
right, exactly. Like
So,
this is the your 4-bar phrase happens here. So just like
right.
you know. That
And so
Yeah.
when I asked for sheet music, I got the bed track that they had already recorded, but then he also sent me the notes. The chart. He was like, here are the notes.
Yeah.
Because he knew that I knew enough to where I could put notes and the melody together to figure out the part, right? But I enjoyed the challenge because that was my first time ever just learning something without having it written for me to memorize, right? It was like I had to create my own memorization of it, and it was a great experience. From someone who was brought up playing in orchestras and chamber orchestras and stuff, it was a great diversion from that.
I tell one story about I had on an album.
Oh, please.
I used a string quartet.
We are going to be here all day.
Get comfy.
Please.
I used a string quartet on an album of mine, an album called Coelacanth. It was this piece I had sort of written on guitar originally, and then I thought, like, oh man, this would be so nice on like strings. So maybe we can simulate that by doing samples or whatever. And it just wasn't happening at the time. The samples didn't sound good enough. So we figured out a way to get a string quartet to come and record this thing, and it was awesome. It was so great. It was like I was so thrilled. But it was you had to pay for their time and do all this stuff. And,
keyboards sometimes just don't cut it.
It just it didn't. It was too exposed. It just didn't work. Nowadays you might be able to get away with it. This is almost 20 years ago. So, but I had a premix of that sort of done, and I was at a gig with the funk band that I was in at the time. And there was a sub sax player that was playing with us. And I was playing this in my car as I pulled up, whatever. And he was listening to it. He's like, what is that? I said, oh, this is my new album. This is a preliminary mix I'm working. He's like, is that a string quartet? I said, yeah. And he's like, God, it must be nice to have a string quartet on your album, And I looked over at the car that he had driven to the gig, which was like that year's model, whatever, Nissan something. So like this was a 2007 Nissan that he was driving. I was in a 14-year-old pickup truck with literally a cardboard back window because my window had broken. I couldn't afford to replace the window, so it was cardboard was behind me. And I'm like, I'm driving, is reminded like the producers. I'm wearing a cardboard belt. I was like, I'm driving a cardboard car so that the money I do have, I spend on a string quartet so that my album can sound really cool. So like you're driving a brand new car that you spent your money on. So it's just the choice that you've made is to have a brand new car. The choice I've made is to have a POS car and have a string quartet on my on my album, because to me that's way more important than what I'm driving. Like who cares what I'm driving? Like please, as long as it carries the gear, who cares what it looks like or whatever. And it's choices, and that's the magic of this independent endeavor, is it's all choices. That's the one.
I'm sorry, I didn't know, Dani, that we have someone on here who was driving a car with cardboard. And I'm so sorry, Dani, that we had to be subjected to this.
Oh my God!
I will correct this in the future. I can't work under these conditions.
Yeah.
No, that's
well. At least he didn't. At least he didn't use. He didn't cut up a viola and put it in the back.
Yeah.
We're a viola household here, by the way. It's not me. It's my older daughter played viola, so I am team viola as well. There, I feel the pain. Yeah,
viola is the best. Viola makes so much more. It's so much more.
I love the sound.
The sound,
the deepness.
So
I mean, these are. I'm. That is such a good story. I've lost my spot in my brain. But so
sorry to.
No, it's
city. Yeah.
This is what it's all about. So I would want to, well, let me just say one thing. So I have no connection to this person. They might even be an a-hole. I don't even know them, but I've been reading Franz Nicolay. I might have even said his name wrong. He's written a book called Band People. He's best known for he was a big part of the band, The Hold Steady, another independent band. He's written a book called Band People. And so many things that you both have said have resonated that are things in this book especially about bands working together, because and I'm going to say this and then turn it over to you guys. But it basically talked about how much is taken for granted. Like, we're just 4 high school buddies. We're going to just be a band and we'll figure it out. It'll be fine. It'll be cool. And, and there's a great point made about, like Rush and REM, these bands that kind of go in with a business agreement. either by accident or intelligence or, foresight, whatever. So these kinds of things are very important on the business side of the band. And my hat is off to you, George, for doing that, because I've been in a situation where sometimes they'll say, I don't even know what chord this is. This is what it's in. Just play. I've been in, I'm a musician too, so I've been in that situation. And I mean, that can be fun, and that can even lead to amazing accidents.
Sure.
But I know also, by the way, I know George Hrab is not Yngwie Malmsteen, so I don't want anyone to come across. And no offense to you, Yngwie, but well, actually, yeah. But Yngwie Malmsteen, if you don't know, he's got a reputation for being the biggest control freak in the world. And Yngwie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think these things are important, and they're important to know when you're working with other people, because as Dani said earlier, you are working with these people. They're your buds, or you met them through an ad in the EC Rocker or something. But this is still a business. So I'm gonna end that rambling note, and then we'll kind of circle to get these people back to their valuable lives. But you guys maybe take that, what I just said, take that and elaborate on that. And yeah, I'll shut up. Go ahead.
No, I have thoughts, because I feel like, so, I talk about this all the time with artists. And I think when one of the decisions that needs to be made when you're putting a band together, whether it's, a happy accident, or you're looking for artists and you put something out there on Craigslist looking for guitarists and drummers and whatnot, and putting your band together, if you need that plan of action. So what do we want our band to be? Do we just want to get together, have fun, play some gigs for free beer? Or do we want to make a actual career out of it? Do we want to do, residencies, or go on little tours, in our area, or something like a little regional tour? I'm not even talking, the big world tour thing, but I feel like when you're starting out, you need to know what you want your band to be, or else you're never going to know what your band is. It's really what it comes down to. So you need that plan. And if you feel like you need to have a contract to put in with all your members of the band, yes, I'm a firm believer in contracts. I've worked with friends, and I have sent them a contract and said, hey, we're just still going to do this anyway, even though I trust you. But and everyone's been good with it so far, but you have to decide what you want to do. And I think that starts with knowing, or at least figuring out, what you want your band to be.
I think there's a real drive, or a real necessity, to be able to make the best thing you can. Like, whatever that thing may be, and whatever that structure may be, whatever genre, whatever thing, song, album, live performance, chorus, bridge, solo, whatever it may be, to make the best thing you can, and then make another best thing you can, and then make another best thing you can. And when that is the impetus for your creative endeavors, everything else kind of, I think I've found, shakes itself out. That if your focus is creating the best thing, again, whatever that thing is, but the best within its stricture, the people that will associate with you, if they have that same vision, will stay with you. People that don't have that same focus will kind of fall away. And you let them. And that's the thing of, like, if you're not interested in creating something which is the best thing we can possibly do with our limited budget, our limited skill, our limited talent, our limited vocabulary, whatever it may be, there is still some level of the best that we can do. All the detritus will kind of slide away. And whether it's even, conflicts in genre, like that, oh no, we don't do that because we're this kind of a band, or I'm this kind of an artist. And it's like, well, no, I'm interested in getting outside of what this genre is, or whatever, like by making the best kind of blendy thing I've made between hip hop and, banjo based, whatever weird concoction you're coming up with. I think the people that you find that tend to be the most successful and the most consistently successful and have the longest careers are those that sort of have this, we're going to make best possible thing we can. And we might be starving. No one else may like it. Like, no one else may get it, but we're going to keep making it. And then when that thing is made, we're going to make another one. And then when that thing is made, we're going to make another one. And that's that sort of beauty of the independent drive, where like you're creating this thing for the purpose of its own existence. And like, just do that. And everything else tends to fall in line, because that's the hardest thing to do. Like, that's, you can make contracts, you can learn how to write music, you can learn to play guitar, you can learn all that stuff. But to make something that's beautiful and awesome is really difficult, you know, and like, have that be your focus.
I like that.
Yes. Wow. So yeah. All right, everyone. George Hrab, again, brilliant musician. I said it was no more compliments, but that's out the window.
Brilliant George, musician. You're brilliant, yeah. George.
Yeah, fantastic drummer. Actually, I'll say one quick thing about George. George did open for me once. The only time we ever played together, George opened for me was at a con.
Right.
Oh, at a con.
Best green room I ever had. It was fantastic.
Yes. Yeah. It was, we made the demands. No. It's a silly anecdote. Yeah. George and I played a con. George was just said, "Hey, why don't I go on first?" That's how it ended up being that George opened for me. But yeah, George, fantastic musician. I've been a fan and friend for years. And actually, I'll say the same about Dani. I've been a fan and friend for many years, and hopefully many more years to come. You guys, this has been a great conversation. If you're watching this and you're not inspired, I don't know what to say, but I will ask you both to take us out with maybe just some words of inspiration, maybe even, you know, tailored to someone who's kind of, you know, in a bad spot right now. It's, you know, in a musician who's kind of looking at less savory options right now. Like, let's maybe inspire people to kind of persist and keep going and keep doing something positive. So, but I'll say that. I'll also say thank you guys both so much for coming on. I really, really appreciate your time and your insights. Thank you.
Well,
like,
Jack,
what are we doing?
Jack, thank you for doing this. First off, like, because this will be an amazing resource for people that are interested in doing this kind of stuff. So thank you for your effort. This is no small endeavor. So I think we as artists really appreciate this kind of stuff, especially people sort of in the, I mean, I'm comfortable saying latter half of our careers, who might have some sort of, you know, idea of what's involved in the beginning of this thing. For me, the best thing I always say, I mean, apart from this idea of trying to just create something interesting, is the crappiest thing that exists is better than the perfect thing in your mind. Like, this is this idea of, I've talked about this before, but this is this idea of brain crack, that you have this idea, like, I'm going to write a space opera based around echidnas. And this is going to be the coolest thing. And as soon as I get like a new guitar that has the low B string, I'm going to record this, and it's going to be amazing. And you get the guitar with the low B string. You know what? If I had that space echo pedal, then it would really be cool. Because then I could do that thing. It's in my head. It's perfect. I could do that thing. And then you get the space echo pedal, and you're like, you know what? I'm using version 8 of GarageBand. So if I update to version 10.6 of GarageBand, then it's going to be really. Meanwhile, you know, Fred, who has a wax cylinder recording of this idea that he put down, that piece of crap that Fred put onto the wax cylinder is 1,000,000 times better than the perfect thing that's in your brain that no one will ever hear. So make a thing with whatever resources you have, even if it's just, you know, scribble down on a piece of paper or whatever. Make the thing. And then make more after you see what works, see what doesn't, and then make more after that. Because the best, crappiest thing that actually exists, a song that's written, a play that's written, a poem that's composed, a whatever, is 1,000 times better than the perfect thing in your mind.
And what is perfection? I mean,
right.
That's the thing. You know, you said it right there with your example. You always want the next thing up, but then you keep reaching and you never get the thing done.
Right.
And yeah, so I would play off of that and say, get out of your head. Number one, you have to stop overthinking what you're doing, create your art, And another thing, since I work on the promotion marketing side of it, is don't get so wrapped up in social media. Artists are trying so hard to go viral, to be seen, thinking that that's suddenly going to propel them to some kind of stardom, which is never going to happen. And granted, it's like making it big. It's like there's that one billionth of a chance that one TikTok video is going to go viral with your song, but then it's gone. It's gone in a flash, you know, and then you still have to deal with your career and what you want to do with your music, right? So don't get so wrapped up in getting it out there. Just create it and then figure out the rest after you've created it to put it out there. And remember that you can always delete it. You know what? If you don't like something that you put out there, it can go away. It's fine. Nobody's going to know and nobody's going to care. So you've got, you know, and then there's the cliche of you do have this and you do have support, and look for it, ask for help. You know, we all seem to be very nice people in the independent world. I mean, just talk to people, just reach out to people, just message people, and you know, you'll get back twofold of what you ask for. You will.
All right. Thank you again, Dani Cutler, George Hrab, Support Life and Music. Thank you so much. Everyone can see my big finger now as I hit the pause button.
Ouch!